So, do you ever think about a 2000s movie and you're like, this is exactly how a 2000 movie should be? It should have an emotional beat, it should have character development, and it should lead to a TV show that lasts for a couple years after it. Nickelodeon is very unique when it comes to their movies. How many Cartoon Network TV shows started out as theatrical films and led into a movie? I mean, I guess just the Powerpuff Girls. I kind of want to talk about the only station that did 2000s movies perfectly, which is Nickelodeon. But they weren't special, technically. Like, what were they doing that Pixar wasn't doing? What were they doing that Disney wasn't doing? Nothing, really. It wasn't about doing something different. It was about doing something the same, but adding much more depth to it. And what makes Nickelodeon unique is its characters, its relationship to the world it lives in. Almost establishing its own world that lore exists, the characters have lived in, and the characters will continue to live in. And to this day, they've done such a good job with that. What's up, everybody? It's Johnny 2000. So I rented out this complex to talk to you guys about a very serious issue. I want to go through the 6 pivotal movies that really solidified what Nickelodeon was trying to do. So these 6 movies are really what shaped Nickelodeon's success in this time. I would argue even it started it and finished it by the end. And I hate to say that these 6 movies are where it got successful, peaked, and then started to fall down, but I definitely think it did. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think these movies are great, and I think a lot of Nickelodeon movies after this were just as good, but these are the 6 I felt like tell the story of how Nickelodeon entered this feature film world. The Nickelodeon movies. Yeah, there's nothing more important going on in our country right now than the discussion of Nickelodeon movies from the 2000s. So we start in 1998 with the Rugrats movie, and that show had a lot of promise. It was about all these babies going on this bigger-than-life adventures in their own home. It was imaginative, creative. It did so much right, and it did even more right when it was taken to its first theatrical movie. So introducing Baby Dill, the movie revolved around Tommy trying to come to terms with the fact that he's going to have to share the attention between his parents. This movie did a great job at establishing an optimistic main character, his flaws, and journey to accept his brother. It was the first Nickelodeon movie to exist, so I would say this is probably defined as like a pioneering movie. It took the babies from out of their normal 11-minute everyday hijinks and brought them to the feature film screen, proving that Nickelodeon cartoons are more than just TV shows, that they could be full franchises. Something that they hadn't really considered up until that point. For me, the most important part of this movie is when Tommy is in the rain looking at his baby brother Dill and has to decide between helping him or completely betraying him. And it's emotionally raw. Like, you would never see that happen in the show, that you never would have expected out of Nickelodeon, and that's what made it so impressive. Not only Tommy, but Chucky, Lil and Dill, even Angelica. The best thing about taking an 11-minute cartoon to a 1.5-hour movie is being able to show multiple sides of the characters, bigger obstacles, and how they overcome those obstacles. That's what makes every Pixar movie good, every Disney movie good, and Nickelodeon was ready to take that step. The feature film format worked so well storytelling-wise because all the characters changed so much from the beginning to the end. And I'm so glad that this is the pioneering lift-off of Nickelodeon movies, the beginning of what would be an amazing run at feature films. Then we have the Jimmy Neutron movie. So Jimmy Neutron was a lot more unique because it didn't have a show to start it. This genius kid that the world just somehow misunderstood. And even though he's got a world of potential, imagination like nobody else, and the genius to back it up, everybody underestimates him. Until they don't have a choice. All the parents get kidnapped and sent out to space. And the only person smart enough to know what to do about it is Jimmy Neutron. I love how we don't see how Jimmy became a genius. He just is a genius. It's just something that's inherent within him. And this proved that a character could come before even a TV show, that Nickelodeon wasn't only good at movies based on TV shows, they were good at movies in general. It was super risky for them to try a new animation style, especially how Rocko's Modern Life, Rugrats, everything had been done on Nickelodeon already, and it was perfected to a T. Like, why would they risk all of it doing an entirely new style? That's what made the Nickelodeon movies great, the risk. The idea that everything could go wrong, but as long as we stick to a flawed character, a relatable story, and really quirky humor, we could make a really good movie. leading to the success that made it into a TV show later. And how often can we say that? Rugrats pioneered the idea that Nickelodeon can make great movies, and Jimmy Neutron was the sophomore album, proving that any circumstance, CGI, 2D animation, it was the story that really brought it home, and it did such a good job doing it. The characters are so unique compared to Rugrats, where since they're not babies, obviously they're slightly more mature, but just immature enough to not be in middle school yet. It was endearing and exactly what Nickelodeon needed at the time. It almost brought positive energy toward being smart and not just rebellious like a lot of its contents would eventually be. And by the end of it, it shows that community is all that matters. Even if one person is a genius, community is stronger than even just that. Then we got the Wild Thornberrys movie. This, I think, is so good at capturing the emotional depth of the quirky attribute that Eliza Thornberry had. Like, we had the entire show that was like, oh, this is such a ridiculous idea. Like, the idea to talk to animals, it's funny, it's humorous, and we get into really quirky situations while we're on this road trip with the family. It's so different from Hey Arnold, Rugrats, even Jimmy Neutron. Like, it captured the adventurous escapades of this family, and it was so fun. And I would say this was the first dramatic movie Nickelodeon made. Like, if you had to strip back all of its humor and quirky sides, it focused on this character so heavily and her secret, which is exactly what I like about the Hannah Montana movie. Like, I love when characters have secrets, right? Because then they have to keep it affects their families, and it affects people around them. And that's exactly what the Wild Thornberrys movie did super well. It took Eliza on a journey that could only happen to her because of her animal talking nature. And it's one of those things where it's like your gift becomes your biggest weakness when it's used against you. And how can somebody overcome something like that? Something that Nickelodeon movies did super well. Coming after Jimmy Neutron, it had a lot of high expectations, especially since Jimmy Neutron made do with nothing. And I definitely think the Wild Thornberrys thrived off of that. It became such a cult classic and drove home that Nickelodeon movies will work every time they're made. Next, we have the Hey Arnold movie. So the Hey Arnold movie is kind of infamous because it didn't do as amazing as people said. There's a lot of rumors around how the script was essentially not supposed to be the final film, but one of 2 theatrical films, and this was the least exciting one. But I look back at this movie and I'm like, I think it's good anyway. The Hey Arnold movie is about this football-shaped kid trying to save his town and do what's right. See, the thing about Nickelodeon characters is they were always optimistic, but they always had one flaw, and it usually had to do with their ego. But it seemed like Hey Arnold had a little bit less of his internal flaws and more of external stakes that he had to deal with. There wasn't a lot of emotional depth or moments that necessarily drove the plot. They were there, and we saw the characters grow and move on despite this really intense situation, but they were just textures. It didn't necessarily move along the plot the way it needed to. And Hey Arnold was already a TV show at this point, so they knew it would be successful. It was almost as if there was less risk not allowing the network to push for more unique story. And this was the first underwhelming Nickelodeon movie, which was completely unheard of. The way the Hey Arnold movie was for Nickelodeon was the way the Powerpuff Girls movie was for Cartoon Network. It was underwhelming. Unfortunately for Cartoon Network, it was one of their first theatrical attempts, so obviously there was more on the line, stopping them from doing too much else. But Hey Arnold was already a continuing movie, so if it didn't do well, it's not like they didn't lose what they earned so far. Rugrats was more about what goes on as a baby, Jimmy Neutron is what goes on as an elementary school kid, and Hey Arnold is what goes on emotionally between all these priorities you have in life, like when you're on the streets, like when you're just in the neighborhood, when, like, kind of like Ed, Edd n Eddy is. And I think the Hey Arnold movie is a lot better than people give it credit for. I do see what everybody's saying about the whole TV movie gone to theatrical release, but I would never call it not successful. Then, of course, we have the peak of Nickelodeon movies, the SpongeBob movie. The SpongeBob movie expanded upon everything that they did right before, the emotional beats, the quirkiness of the characters, and a main flaw that really drove the main character to overcoming obstacles. It was clear that SpongeBob had enough fun in games, and it was time to kick him up into the next level with a literal fish out of water movie. And there's such a good motivation for this main character to keep going. Despite his childlike nature, He seems to really have this yearning to be a responsible adult, which is something we can all relate to as we're watching kids' movies. At the time, we were so limited in what we can do. SpongeBob tapped into this yearning that every kid had to become an adult, and talking about what it really meant to have these kinds of responsibilities, to be quote-unquote a man. And unlike the usual episodes of SpongeBob, which it was about 3 seasons in when this movie happened, so taking this innocent, childlike, optimistic Sponge and throwing him into the darkness and the depths of the real world through this metaphor of underwater, showing us places that we've never seen through the show, showing us people that are kind of dangerous and put us in really complicated situations, and throw it into the SpongeBob movie, with the goal of trying to get Neptune's crown in order to save his friend's family and the town he lives in. SpongeBob and Patrick journey all the way outside of the water to try to do this quote-unquote responsible thing. The 2D animation really owned itself and took SpongeBob into levels that you would never expect, with just a few shadows, wider areas. SpongeBob elevated itself just within the movie format. We have a lot more to the SpongeBob movie series than we ever had originally, but if we're gonna take that in isolation, the thing that made the first movie so great is working within the confines it was already given with the show. Imagine you couldn't change anything in the movie. The only thing you could change is the story. And that's what the SpongeBob movie does so well. They managed to get the story, make it so impactful that the entire thing feels like a big event. It's kind of like a Pee Wee Herman animated movie, where you see this one innocent Sponge trying to make something of his life. It's something we all deal with, and especially in the early 2000s. But after the SpongeBob movie, I would say it was never the same again. Next, we had Barnyard. So Barnyard is 2006, and this is kind of the end of my retrospective on this, because I want to drive home the point that it peaked, and then it kind of went down a little bit before it really started going downhill in the 2010s. This kind of confidence would eventually bite them in the butt, though, with Barnyard from 2006. Barnyard was a lot more quirkier. Otis was a really likable character, and his journey after his father had died was emotional, to say the least. I love that we have a strong emotional backbone of his father to carry on the movie. It is an incredible Nickelodeon film. They managed to balance the humor and the heart really well, and adapt to what movies in general were about to become. They were no longer about this single character with its single goal, accomplishing this one single thing. Like, it was completely humor-based, like the idea that these farm animals can return and attack the humans. And I noticed that Nickelodeon pivoted a lot more after these movies to focus more on the jokes and the characters. It's almost like they had this confidence that they're like, we know we can make good movies, so let's just do whatever we want. And they kind of abandoned the things that made them so unique. Just really have fun with it. And that's where I feel like the character of movies started to decline. Something about Nickelodeon movies since has just kind of become more about comedy as opposed to emotional stakes. I really do like the second SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, but that is a prime example of when Nickelodeon got a little bit too confident for their britches. And they were less focused on making these Pixar, like, one-character movies, exploring the emotional depth of a show they've created, and became more about how can we entertain people for as long as possible. I mean, maybe we could owe this to the 2010s becoming a lot more comedy-centric. It's a lot harder to get kids' attention nowadays, and even the rebellious nature of cartoons that Nickelodeon started in the early 2000s was kind of losing its wear, especially since Cartoon Network was doing the same thing. Things became a lot more samey, so it was a lot harder to maintain what worked. If anything, they tried to do new, riskier things that didn't necessarily benefit them in the long run. I mean, if I were Nickelodeon, obviously you're gonna keep making risk, keep doing new things, but they abandoned the formula that worked for them so well. And that's something that Pixar and Disney movies never did. They never abandoned the story being the primary focus. And I feel like, if anything, the things that make cartoon series work so well are the comedic nature of the characters. It's all about the characters, the comedic nature of the characters, how the characters work. That's why shows go on for so long, because you can explore different parts of their lives in different episodes and make that work. But the thing that doesn't work about movies with characters is that there needs to be a beginning, middle, and end. Unlike TV shows, we have to find a way to make this feel conclusive, feel character development-y fresh. You would assume that that's only going to be to their benefit, but it's just not. But the 2000s are something that cannot be compared to. You can't recreate magic like that, but you can come close, and I think a lot of movies Nickelodeon is trying to come up with is recreating that magic, and I think it's working. Overall, Nickelodeon movies are hard to ignore. They're unique, they're special, and they were doing something at the time that wasn't super normal. And while Pixar and Disney were doing a great job at pumping out movies, Nickelodeon proved that they weren't the only ones who could make movies so good. From the Rugrats movie to Jimmy Neutron to the Wild Thornberrys, Hey Arnold, SpongeBob, and then Barnyard, the 2000s Nickelodeon movies are just a force to be reckoned with, especially more over time since. But what were your guys' favorite movies that Nickelodeon created? Was it because it was a TV show first? Was it because it's a TV show after? Is the emotional beats what you really missed? I mean, what did you guys think about during this video? I'm so curious. Please comment below and tell me what you miss about Nickelodeon movies. My name is Johnny2000, covering movies, TV, media, video games, and so much more from the 2000s, so I hope you guys have a great day.